heart's been running miles, chasing every burden, wearing every smile. But all my trying only leaves me dry till I hear you whisper, child, in me abide. You are my Sabbath, Jesus, I rest in you. All of my striving falls at your feet, made new here in your presence, nothing left to prove. You are my Sabbath, Jesus, I rest in you. You finished every battle, you spoke, it's done and paid. You carry what I couldn't, you walked out of that grave. So why would I keep running like it's all on me when your nail-scarred hands have already set me free? You are my Sabbath, Jesus, I rest in you. All of my striving falls at your feet, made new here in your presence, nothing left to prove. You are my Sabbath, Jesus, I rest in you. I lay it down, I lay it down, every fear, every crown at your feet right now. Oh, I breathe you in, I'm breathing out my doubt. You are my peace, my soul's forever found. You are my Sabbath, Jesus, I rest in you. All of my striving falls at your feet, made new here in your presence, nothing left to prove. You are my Sabbath, Jesus, I rest in you. Here in your presence, Jesus, I rest in you. Yeah, yeah. You are my Sabbath, all of my rest is you.
Welcome back. It is good to have everyone. Man, I'm excited. I absolutely loved the last conversation with Drew and excited to get in it. I'm not going to do a ton of intro. I would say, can you do me a favor and just like, subscribe, hit the share button, at minimum, send this to someone you like. If you want to be weird, send it to someone you don't like. I don't know. Is that a thing? Let's get started, man. Let's bring in Drew. How are you doing, man?
Hey, Mike. Good.
It is good to see you. I want to do something fun. I didn't prep you for this at all. Okay. So, what I like to do on some of these is I like to just show a few books that I've recently bought.
Okay.
And I don't know, you might know him, you might not. And maybe you can give me some feedback on him.
Okay. This could
So
be dangerous.
I paid a whopping $7 for these, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I have gotten into like going to used bookstores. And so I always feel weird picking up a book that I know a scholar has spent like hundreds of hours on. And here this one costs $2. But what do
Yeah.
you think about this one? Have you ever read this
Yeah.
one?
I have not read it by No Trimper. Good scholar. It's going to be solid work all day, every day. Yeah.
I love it. Tremper, I have really grown to appreciate. I saw this and I'm like, man, I have to pick this up. Only $2. Apparently this is IVP academic.
Yeah.
I don't know if people can see that. No, you can't really.
It's a whole series.
I love it. So that's the first. So I did a good job on the first one.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. All right. Now
Trimper will not guide you wrongly.
I love that. I love it. Now this one I was surprised. The 5th edition of this one, I looked at it, would cost me $150.
Oh, geez.
I paid $3 for this.
Well, understanding the Old Testament. Who's it by? I can't see.
This is by Bernhard Anderson. Have you?
I do not know that.
No?
I'm going to guess it's from the 1990s, or is this a new edition of an old?
So
book?
this is 2nd edition. The 5th edition is out, and it's like 2000, early 2000s. This is put out by Prentice Hall.
Okay.
So it's kind of more. I don't know if you call it more of a critical.
No, that's going to be if it's Prentice Hall, that's going to be a textbook that is intended to be used in the classroom in non-religious settings. So that's kind of like
there you go.
Public university course that's teaching, Bib Lit or something like that.
Love it. All right, now for the big one. You're going to be surprised. I paid $2 for this. $2.
Oh, I can't read it.
You can't see it.
Your autofocus
you can't
is not
see
helping
it.
us. No, I cannot.
No, the autofocus is horrible. All right, here we go. I'll do it this way.
Oh, is that? Wait. I think I know who that. I can't read the name though.
It's Alfred Edersheim.
Okay, I don't know him either. But I'm gonna guess if it's
this is by Erdmans, and
Okay,
this one's put out.
80s?
This is old. The first print was 1971. The 4th edition, which is this one, was 74.
That's when I was born. Okay, so I'm going to guess. So that's before the kind of big movements in the Jewishness of Jesus. So it's probably going to have a very, I don't know if this will mean anything to you, a very German take on Jesus.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it could be surprise. Maybe this is a guy who was cutting edge in the 1970s.
It's interesting because this is the University of Oxford.
Yep.
Which I'm assuming is going to be a reasonably, I don't know, maybe not a reasonably critical
I mean,
approach.
Oxford is the top.
Yeah.
Oxford, Cambridge, and then kind of you have a few other university, but universally, Oxford and Cambridge are going to be your 2 top university presses.
But this is one book with volume. There's like, how many books in this? There's 3 books in one.
Oh, yeah.
So I think you can get it in 3 different volumes. Yeah.
There are this kind of movement in biblical studies. Maybe it's not just in the 70s, but it certainly is happening in the 70s. Like big explanation of everything, kind of like what systematic theologies do. Like, I always tell my students, the systematic theology is one dude, and it's almost always a dude, but not always, but usually a dude, trying to explain the entire world and the Bible and how it all fits together.
I don't know if it matters, but a book this thick.
Yeah.
How come you didn't make yours?
Yeah. You could beat your children with that book, right? So.
You could. I don't know that you would. This would just be like just a reprimand if you used your book. It wouldn't be,
I think scholars always want to write those longer books because we always have more to say. And I'm kind of glad every time an editor has said, cut this 10,000 words out or something. They have never been wrong. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. And it usually ends up being another project or it goes into another book later or something. So
I love that.
My
Well,
my
go
my
ahead.
my big it's kind of my tome, my own like take on things is with Cambridge University Press. And all three reviewers loved the book, which you don't get this in academic reviews very often. All three were very positive, and all three said the exact same thing: cut the final chapter. I was like, done. When you have
I
three
love it.
scholars all say the same thing, you're like, okay, clearly that needs to be cut.
I
So
love it. Well, I know that we had several people in my line of work or in my sphere that have since our last conversation actually read the book. So
wow.
that was cool. Yeah. So I'm excited because this is going to be a little bit different than our first conversation. There's a few things I want to get into, but we've got some questions as well that I think are in the chat that we can cover. But I really want to hit on. I wanted to tell you this. I spend a lot of time in Logos, and I found you in Logos the other day.
Oh, yeah.
You were doing one of the classes on Hebraic
the video
thought.
course.
And
Yeah,
I'm like, that's true.
yeah. That was me. You know, like there's the appearance versus the reality. That was me, like spending 6 days in a basement during COVID in Washington State, Bellingham, Washington.
That's awesome.
And it was because it was during COVID, like nobody could be in the room. So I was in the room by myself, and all the tech people were in a completely separate room. And we were all isolated, and yeah, and the whole room was dark. You know, you're standing in front of this white wall, but like everything in front of you is black. So it was just black and me staring into a camera and a teleprompter for 6 days. So I do not have fun memories of that that class.
That's really hard to like engage or get any kind of
And you have to pretend like there's really excited students on the other side of the camera, you know.
Wow.
But, yeah. So, but
tell us a little bit. Yeah, tell us a little bit about, because I did promote your website. Tell us a little bit about like Hebraic thought. Like what is, because I think that dovetails well into our conversation. Like what is Hebraic thought?
Yeah, so it sounds fancier than what it is. It really just means the biblical authors, and beginning in the Torah, they have very specific ways of thinking about the world. And I don't mean like they think the world is a 3-decker universe, flat Earth or something. I mean like very specific thoughts about the nature of justice, the nature of time, the nature. How do you know things better rather than worse? How do you know things more precisely rather than misunderstanding things? The nature of love, even the nature of law, like what's rational, what makes sense. They have some very deeply embedded views on these things. And we often, you know, our nemesis in our project for the Center for Hebraic Thought. So all we mean is what the biblical authors thought about the world. The nemesis is people want to run to anything but the biblical authors first. They want to run to a theological treatise. They want to run to Augustine. They want to run to whoever. They always want to run somewhere else instead of just really getting their head around what the biblical authors think about certain things. And so that's been, and it's, you know, kind of been a lifelong frustration of mine since I became a Christian. Mainly because I became a Christian, went to seminary, and then did another master's degree in philosophy, where I realized, and I'm glad I did it in that order, because I went into philosophy. Now, this is all atheistic analytic philosophy, so this is not this is not. I was treated very well as a pastor and a Christian, but it was very clear nobody there believed in a God or Jesus or anything like that. But it was in philosophy that I learned there are no new questions that the biblical authors aren't dealing with as well. Like I thought philosophy was going to have all these really interesting other answers, and I realized they don't have any answers. It's not their fault; they're just stuck in the same problem we all are. And their answers are really lame for the most part. You kind of have to make up realities in order to make it all fit together. And I just was not interested. I was a pastor, you know. I was dealing with people who lost their children, and I was working with children's ministry and forming young adults and that kind of stuff. I just was not interested in making up fantasy realities. And so I went back into theology and biblical studies, where I did my PhD, and I realized there's a bunch of people in theology and biblical studies who are also making up their own realities. And I think it just drilled me down into like, let's just listen to what the biblical authors say, how they say it, get that burned into our psyche, and then we can put all this other stuff in conversation. And we can see
What is the what would you say? I've heard other scholars say like cultural river, cognitive
Yeah, John
framework,
Walton
these other phrases that get used. Are you kind of saying the same thing, or is it different?
No. Well, John, this is where John Walton and I, which I'm friends with John, but we would just disagree. We have disagreed about this.
Sure. Yeah.
He tends to think you can't cross the streams, to use a Ghostbusters analogy. You can't
Really?
go
Okay.
across the rivers. And so the biblical river has nothing to say to us today. We're reading somebody else's mail. It has no morality for us, at least the Old Testament for him. And so I don't think that at all. Actually, so the reason I think we need to really get our head around what the biblical authors think is so we can extend their thinking into all these areas that they don't talk about, but they have very sophisticated thoughts about.
Okay.
Now's going to be the time when I don't remember what I said on your part one. So you just flag me if you're like, yes, you talked about this.
It's all good.
But I always go to the example of incarceration, of jailing people, right? You have a whole system of justice in the Torah that has no provision for incarceration.
Yeah.
But surely the biblical authors, if we got into their thinking, would have something to say about how we incarcerate people today. I do a lot of work on scientific thinking in the Bible, like how you get ideas, concepts that eventually become modern science that come exclusively from the Hebrew Bible and not from the Greek or Roman traditions or Sumerians or Mesopotamians or Egyptians. So I'm really interested in like why they took these very skeptical attitudes towards reality. They didn't buy things. Even when God was talking, they were skeptical, right? And they're kind of renowned in ancient Near Eastern literature of being the non-naive people who were skeptical of everything, which is kind of the foundations of science, right? It's like, are you sure about that? How can I know? How can we rationally, like, what's the rationale behind this? Which you get throughout Scripture, which God not only doesn't poo-poo it, he welcomes it when people are skeptical of him. He's like, okay, you need to be convinced. Let's convince you, right? And so there's a lot of this thinking that has kind of become modern so-called Western thought, so that my atheist friends in America basically live along the lines of the Hebrew ethics in the Torah. I mean, they basically support all the ethics of the Torah. Even if you think of like same-sex marriage or marriage equality, it's going for Torah marriage in a marriage equality situation, right? So I've noticed marriage equality is not that people can marry 15 people, or people can be like in weird polyamorous relationships legally recognized by the state. They want a one-on-one marriage. They just want it to be same sex, right? I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, or I'm just saying it's funny that they have taken that view. We've all taken the view for granted that you're supposed to show compassion for people, even if you're not related to them or you're not the same nationality of them. If somebody collapses across the street, you should cross the street to go help them. It's not that those are all exclusively Hebrew ideas, but they are the only ones that legal treatise and the narratives of Israel burn into the people of Israel, that you must do these things. This is law, right? That's why on "O Holy Night," the second I think is the second verse, starts with "His law is love," right? And I don't know who wrote "O Holy Night." I haven't looked it up, but whoever wrote it got it right. They understood that this is a very intriguing way to look at the world, and we basically live that way today, even if you're an atheist. So Christians don't really stand out much today in at least American culture, because it's so thickly Hebraic-Christian in the way it thinks about the world.
Interesting.
And I'm not making a claim that we're all superior than the rest of the world because we think. I'm just saying that like I would be having this conversation with anybody, any of my colleagues who are believers, non-believers, atheists, Jewish, whatever. Yeah.
Interesting. Ethics in the Hebrew Bible is an interesting. I mean, it rubs up against with what we're talking about, even though it's not the. I mean, biblical law is kind of it does intersect with ethics.
It is, so is modern law, right? I mean, So we were talking about last time the divisions of the law and the civil, ceremonial, moral, and the routines I go through with my classes is I say, okay, give me a law. They'll always name speeding. I don't know why. That's the law they always go to.
It's the one they're all breaking, probably.
Right. Well, exactly. Well, it's funny, when I taught in New York City, my kids didn't drive. They just took the train everywhere. So like speeding was not a thing for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But everywhere else, the teenagers are most worried about that one. And say, great. Okay. Why shouldn't you speed? I mean, just like, let's just game this out. Why shouldn't you speed? And they're going to say, well, you're breaking the law. Okay. Yeah. But fine. The law could be changed. You could say that, my mom lived in Montana when there was no speed limit in Montana. It just said a reasonable speed or whatever. Yep. Right. So the law can be changed. Why should you still not go excessively fast? Essentially you only have to do a few whys, like explain the next answer to me, to very quickly get down to, because it's not loving your neighbor, essentially. Like it's dangerous, and it could impede on their sense of happiness through living a full-bodied, non-paraplegic life, if being paralyzed from an accident or whatever. And you could do the same thing with the tax code. It's only going to be, like 7 degrees of moral law, the Kevin Bacon game. You're going to eventually get down to deep-seated moral ideas, what philosophers call meta-ethical theory or meta-ethical beliefs, where they're basically the kinds of things you go, I don't know, I can't justify them. I just think it's wrong, right? Or I just think that humans should do this, right? What's interesting to me is that just with the Hebrew Bible, New Testament too, but if you just had the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, you can give a really good answer to the question of why we should treat people in a certain way, in a way that you can't in modern legal thinking. So I probably tip my hat at it, but it's very difficult for me to then segment civil law from moral law. And then I have even more trouble, as you saw in the book, separating out ceremonial law from civil law, from moral law. And you have rituals in the Torah, many of them, but I mean, some of them just directly pull all those categories directly. Like I'm thinking of the possibly adulterous woman, or the possibly unrighteous husband who's jealous of his wife, even though he doesn't have reason. Is that a civil law? Yes. Is that a ceremonial law? Absolutely. It's using rituals to adjudicate in the courtroom. The courtroom is God, and it's using rituals to adjudicate her, and God is one of her witnesses.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely moral law. Like it tells the man how he should feel and act at the end if he's wrong.
So how?
Yeah, sorry.
No. I'm trying to think what would be the best next direction to go on this, because it has become almost normalized in modern Christianity. And when I say modern, there goes my camera again. It goes auto messing up. It's within the last at least couple hundred years, it's become like almost normalized to separate the laws, and then to, this law was nailed to the cross. You get this language that gets very like, Christocentric view of the law, which I'm not against, as long as we flesh it out right. But
and part of it is you're starting with your answer, and then you're going to look for the right question in the Old Testament, kind of a thing. And that's probably
you mean proof texting? Is that
I didn't? Yeah. I'm not going to accuse any theologians of like, but there is a tendency towards that. Yeah. I think I just submitted a chapter in a book. It's a collection. Actually, John Walton's in this book as well. Whereas about 8 of us Old Testament scholars got together, and we talked about how should we teach the church how to better look at the Old Testament Christologically. Interestingly, even though Ian Proven, me, John Walton, David Firth, Chris Hansberry, there's a collection of people, old and young, and we all basically have the same belief that that's a bad way to go about it, is start with your answer and then go back. And so we even wrote like a 2-page statement as to why that's a problem. And I was we all kind of had varying suggestions, but my suggestion was, which was like several other suggestions, is when you understand the patterns of thinking in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Then you turn to the New Testament, you can now make sense of all these enigmatic things that Jesus says and does, because you have patterns. And you can make sense of the narrative, right? If Jesus is the Messiah, this is the one that I was working on. Great. When did he get anointed with oil in private by the prophet of God, where God told the prophet, this is the one, and then later publicly revealed as the King of Israel? Because that's the pattern, right?
Yeah.
And that will point you to very specific passages in the Gospels where you can then see, oh, the pattern is actually more connected to the Davidic and Saul pattern than you might have originally even suspected, like the Spirit of God coming upon them, being related directly to salvation of people, etc. So it's not, when you're a Bible scholar, which I pretend to be on weekends, you get questions from people that are often framed like this: what's so wrong with preaching the Old Testament Christologically, or seeing Jesus under every rock in the Old Testament, right? And that's, to me, that's the wrong question. It's the same thing. It's like the question I talked about last time: what's wrong with me having sex with my boyfriend, right? It's the wrong question, because the answer that the biblical authors are going to give you is it's not wise, and it won't lead to wisdom, and it won't cause wisdom in yourself or others, right? That's just not a wise way to go about it. But when I read Jesus reading the law, again, he takes the moral, civil, and ceremonial. I'm just pretending like those are a thing. He takes all three and he works across them very quickly in his thinking as one set of thinking about the world. So part of me is like, don't ask me what's wrong with looking at it that way. Ask why Isaiah doesn't look at it that way. Why does Amos not look at it that way? Why does Nehemiah not look at it that way?
Yeah.
Like, that's the better question. And then ultimately, why does Jesus not treat the Torah that way?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a couple of things. I do think that we have not been trained, especially the lay people, have not been trained in how to ask good questions, especially when it comes to studying scripture. I was in a conversation, I think a week ago, or maybe a little bit longer than that. I'll leave names out, but I was in a conversation and we were actually discussing the Exodus 20 to 23, and then the covenant, the blood covenant, that's the law, well, it's the Mosaic law. Okay. And they wanted to immediately go to Ephesians to have and my immediate response was, why are we going to the New Testament to understand?
Right.
That doesn't and you should have seen the look on their face. They thought I was a heretic. You're not going to go? Like, no, let's stay right here. I want to talk about how Moses viewed his law that was being given to him by Yahweh, that was in covenant relationship with the Israelites. That's what I want to talk about. We can talk about how other people in the New Testament then, apply it or repackage it or kind of engage with it, but we need to start here.
Yeah, I make a point that is always unnecessarily controversial with, in churches and in classes, which is that when Moses gives the Torah, I mean, Moses' voice and God's voice are almost merged by the end of Deuteronomy. You can't tell who's speaking anymore. And in Deuteronomy 13 and 18, but especially 18, I mean, you get a very strong, not just a feel. It says basically anybody who says something against what God has told them in the Torah, don't listen to that person, right? Like that, you shouldn't ever listen to them. What's amazing to me is that you come into the Gospels, Jesus believes that as well. And he believes that about his own teaching, that he can't say a thing that goes against the Torah, because the Torah, as we would understand as Christians, he was involved in the instruction of the Torah.
Tell the audience what you mean by the Torah, because some might not even understand. Like, is that the first five? Is it all?
Yeah.
Is it
Torah we call it the Pentateuch, the five books of Moses. Though it's questionable whether Moses had anything to do with Genesis, but certainly he has his hand involved in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And by that, separating that from the Hebrew scriptures, which is just another word for the Old Testament. but again, I have lots of Jewish friends who find it highly offensive, like, oh, the Old Testament, oh great, right? Or the you could call it the New Testament, the Second Testament, or the Newer Testament, or something like that. But yeah, so when Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount is the obvious place, but there's many places in the Gospels you could point to, that when Jesus starts talking about the Torah, he very quickly clarifies, do not think that I've come to do away with any of the Torah. And he actually says, not a single dot, a jot or tittle, as the Germans like to say. Not even a dot on the I is going to be taken away. So he speaks in very strong language, which means he's aware that Deuteronomy is constraining to him.
Yeah, this part I think is what really confuses people, because I think the Hebrew roots movement, even Messianic Jews, there's even veins of certain traditions of Protestantism that will take that as a, well, it's eternally binding on us now.
Right.
So they'll extrapolate from that, something, whatever their tradition teaches. So, how do we understand what Jesus is saying? Because he is speaking about not only, if you believe in the triune God, Jesus is the one that gave the law, even though he wasn't in that same, I always feel weird talking about the triune God, right? Because I feel like I'm going to say something heretical.
Yeah, it's not hard to do if you especially get around I know Trinitarian theologians, and it's like you can't say anything.
It's like I don't want to say anything wrong,
Yeah.
But the giving of the law, we believe that to be God, right? That's Yahweh, and Jesus is Yahweh. He is God. So how do we understand that in a post-Christ, especially Gentile, postmodern Christian?
Right. Well, lucky for us, postmodernism ended in about 1986, so we don't have to deal with that anymore. Although the evangelicals have kept postmodernism alive as their boogeyman for the last 40 years.
There's a lot of people that think in that vein, though.
Oh, I know. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody who thinks like a postmodern, but people superficially, right? So if you ask my kids, do you believe everybody has a right to their own truth? They would say, yeah, of course, because that's what their culture teaches them. Just ask them two more questions about what they believe, and you'll realize they're not postmodernists at all. They believe in very absolute rights and wrongs. In fact, they're almost the opposite of postmodernists now, because they live in this borderland of rules that can get you canceled, right? And so you want to do the right thing and not the wrong thing. And they're not even thinking along those lines. So hypermodernist is probably the right theory for these people.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
But I think what you see you can see it in a couple of waves in the Old Testament. You can see like what happens when Israel totally collapses in the book of Judges. They become the Sodomites, they become the Gomorrites, they become the worst things that humans can become, and God wipes them out, right? What he does is he raises up a central national prophet who is going to restore the Torah and kind of redirect them, and which is why Samuel's so mad when they ask for a king, right? Because he's like, you guys aren't getting this, right? And they always return to some kind of the liturgy or the worship of Israel that they were called to in the Torah. You'll get the same thing. Interestingly, after the exile, central national prophets play a lesser role. There are no kings after the exile. So that really these idea of the Messianic king comes into play about 100 years before Jesus, 150 years before Jesus, where you have this kind of uprising against the Greeks and then later the Romans by people who are claiming to be the new Messianic king in the line of David, right? And then a whole family who claims not just to be the kings, but they're also the priest, right? So they're like the double duo or whatever. That to say, even if you're just reading the Hebrew scriptures and with Jesus in the time of Jesus, if you're older over his shoulder, just reading the prophets, the Torah, and the Psalms, as they're called, you would see the development of the thinking of the Torah and how the Torah is practiced in various different ways in different cultural settings. Remember, the Torah, if it's given around 1200 BCE, depending on what people think the dates are, by the time you get to the exile, you're talking 500 to 700 years later, maybe 800 years later. It's a different culture. They still speak Hebrew, but they speak a different type of Hebrew. They live in a currency-driven economy where it used to be an agrarian subsistence bartering economy only.
Yeah.
They've had to adapt laws of the Torah to these new cultural situations, right? Where there was no clear law on how to deal with this thing.
Are
right?
you referring to after the Babylonian exile? Is that what?
No. Well, that as well. That's later. But even before the Babylonian exile, the cultures of Israel in the north and Judah in the south are significantly different than what Joshua brought into the land of Israel, right?
Well, they would have to in order to be culturally like not significant, but like to make any sense. There'd have to be some sort of.
But we have a control case just south of them where if you look at Egypt, I have some friends that are in Egypt right now, so they've been sending me all these these hieroglyphs. Egypt does not change for thousands of years. I mean, if you look at art on the wall, you can't tell whether it's 2,000 years old. Well, maybe in the Roman period, you can see some influence there. But prior to the Roman period, you have a several thousand year period where they use the exact same style of art. They use the exact same dimensions. They have like a royal meter for how tall humans can be, how tall gods can be. And that's why when you look across it over centuries, it all looks the same. And just think about the last 300 years of art in Western Europe or the last 300 years of art in South America or something like that. Jan Assmann, who was a famous Egyptologist who recently died, he once said, the amazing thing is that you could have an Egyptian during the Roman period, so 300 years before Jesus, who could stand at a funerary site and read off the wall the words on the wall that were written 3 years before him. Now, think about what was English doing 3,000 years ago? So I say 300 or 3,000. It's 3,000 years ago, right?
3,000. Yeah.
Yeah, English wasn't doing anything. It didn't exist. What was English even doing 300 years ago? It would be difficult to understand it, right? So you have a lot of very stable cultures and somewhat similar in story in Mesopotamia. They're not quite the same. But you have kind of the Hebrews who have these kind of very central ideas. You don't make images of things, which is why we have no images of ancient Hebrews in the Iron Age. The only image we have is of a Hebrew king Jehu or Jehu bowing to a Neo-Assyrian king in a relief. They worship this one god. They also mix their worship with all these other gods, which the biblical authors think is a problem and tell you about constantly. And they're kind of a rough and tumble group of people who live in a really hostile landscape. And things change, technologies change. It was the Bronze Age. They move into the Iron Age. They have to, can you get your plows sharpened by your enemies? Well, apparently yes, because 2 Kings says they didn't have the ability to sharpen their own iron instruments, even their swords. And so they had to take them down to the Philistines to have them sharpened, and they were getting price gouged by them. Does the Torah let you do that? I don't know. No. The Torah doesn't even begin to address something like that, right? So you have to. So even within the Old Testament, before the exile, Israel had to get inside the thinking of the Torah and extend it into all these new situations they were running into that aren't discussed in the Torah. And that's even more true after the exile and during the exile, especially. And that's still true when Jesus comes in and Roman occupied Judea. And I mean, what does he do in Matthew's gospel? He says, all right, Sermon on the Mount. Note, I am sticking with the Torah, but I'm going to tell you what it looks like in this context, right? And some of you have lost the plot, and I need to recontextualize the Torah for you even more so.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to what you're saying, I mean, Jesus especially extends the law even further than, you say that you shouldn't commit adultery in your law. I say, you shouldn't even look at a woman with, there's this almost like this doubling down,
right?
Which again is difficult for people to understand. And I think part of the problem is because we're thinking of the law, you bring this up, in a legislative mind. Like, oh, do this, don't do this, check this off, don't, and that's not the rule of thinking inside of the Hebrew mind.
Yeah, and I think that's why in Hebraic thought, what we mean by that is it's meant to actually form how you think and behave in the world as a community, not just as an individual. It's actually primarily focused at the community. Of course, Christians in the West have done this horrible thing with Jesus's teaching, and they've made it all individualistic, and it's about me getting my relationship with Jesus straight out. And that is just not the area of focus of the Old or New Testament. God does care about you, but most of the yous that are translated in English as you are actually y'alls, both in the Old and New Testament, that they're talking to the community, and through the community, you get taken care of as well. So, we have legislation, ideas of legislations that are just rules that you either break or keep, which is what we drag to the law, to the Torah. We have these ideas that it's about individuals keeping the Torah. We have this idea that it's we live in a liberal democracy, that you can do what you want unless the law says you cannot do that thing. And again, that doesn't get you anywhere near what's going on in the Torah, because there's actually hundreds of laws that are not restrictive, but are meant to be pro-social and producing you into a type of person, and actually into a type of people. So it's a very different structure. I just want people, one of the reasons I didn't deal with the New Testament is because in my mind, I know this is not going to come across in the book, but in my mind, if you understand what's going on inside the Old Testament, then the New Testament is just an extension of a lot of things that have already been going on with the law, including the changing of rituals over time. That rituals are not always done in the same way over time.
So this is a good, let's see if I can get this right. I've got two quotes.
Okay.
I don't know if they'll come up right in the book. So here's the first one. So it's actually on page 107. And I think this is the beginning of it's beginning of chapter 6. And it says, so you say, biblical law comes to us as instruction, not as rules to break or keep. But is it reasonable instruction? Instruction must accomplish what it is supposed to. If Torah were just a list of 613 rules, then an Israel that followed those 613 rules would be doing what it's supposed to do. Yet the Torah does not actually describe God as the great lawgiver. God makes treaties with Israel, and this stipulated relationship becomes part of how God reasons with Israel. So break that down a little bit. There's the 613. I found it interesting that you said Torah does not actually describe God as the great lawgiver. That might cause someone to twitch.
Well,
but what do you mean by that?
Excuse me.
And you do have a footnote on that, because you say in your footnote, when God is called king or father or shepherd, there must be a subject, a child or sheep. Jeremiah, and then you kind of referenced another professor, another individual.
Jerry Unterman. Yeah, Jerry Unterman book. What's the name of that?
It is
great book, Justice for All.
How the Jewish Bible revolutionized
ethics. Yeah, fantastic book. Jerry is like a father to me, and he's a great thinker on this. He's a Jewish scholar in Israel, but he's very sober about and he knows the ancient Near Eastern literature very well. And I think when we get to the issue of God as a lawgiver, as soon as I say lawgiver, I can't help but imagine somebody handing down rules, right? And I'm not saying, I think I said this last time, I'm not saying that there are no rules in Scripture, like it's all willy-nilly, touchy-feely. I mean, there are certainly some boundary conditions there, right? In the same way that when I love my children, when I remember when my 4 kids were under 5 years old, I always say, if you followed me around on any given day with my children, especially if I was by myself without my wife. And you wrote down every single thing I said to my children on that day. And then you tried to go home and make a theology of fatherhood according to Dru Johnson. It would just be, don't touch this, don't do that, put that down, go over here, don't get it, don't eat that, don't put your finger in your sister's ear. And you would come up with this very specific view of who I was. But if you then ask me, why are you yelling at your kids all day long? It's like, oh, because I love them so deeply and I want them to have good friendships with each other later in life. And I want to be, a good father to them. And at this point, that's what it takes. So you get those kind of rules in there, but they're the kind of boundary marker issues. Most of it is this idea, not of breaking or keeping. And again, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but break or keep are metaphors, right? Like you can't break a law unless you like printed it on a stick and then broke the stick. And I guess then you could break a law. But it's a metaphor that essentially situates the law as a rule that is either kept or violated. There's nothing in between. There's no interpretation needed. Of course, this isn't true. All of our laws have to be interpreted, and it's why the courts are clogged, right? But it's at least the standard we hold. In the Torah, in the legal sections, because I know some people are thinking like, wait, it says keep the law all the time in the Torah. And it does say to keep the law.
Well, were you the one that pointed out, or I can't remember if I read it or if we talked about this before, where keep really is more a metaphor of like a shepherd would keep the sheep.
Right.
It's not the kind of like keeping the letter of the law in that respect. It's almost to like shepherd it. It's to think well about it. It's to meditate on it. It's to don't let it go. Don't let it away from you. Don't forget about it. It's that kind of keep. Yeah, exactly. Is that fair?
In the first 4 chapters of Genesis, Genesis 2 and 4, you get both of many uses of keep. Abel is a keeper of sheep, which then Cain says, "Who am I? Am I my brother's keeper?" In this kind of snarky retort to God, right? And then you get God put the man in the garden to work and to keep it, right? So, of course, this happens after you publish the book. Now I have some bumper sticker versions of what I'm trying to say. So, like the thumbnail would be, keep the Torah like you keep a garden. You work it and you keep it and you cultivate it and you in order to grow and flourish, right? And that's actually the metaphor that's being used here, is you keep as a form of cultivation, which again, U.S. law is, in like many liberal democracies, our law isn't even constructed to do something like that. It's not like you can say, oh, we should do that today with American law. Our law doesn't even work that way. So you can get hints of it here and there, but we can't actually keep the law in that way today.
So I'm putting some of this together. So what I'm hearing, I see how it would be very difficult. We're not even a communal, like group of people. So the best way I can think of this is, when I worship with the body of believers at our church, like that's the most communal that I feel. And then I get snippets of it when I, meet with my Bible study group or my men's group or my, my community. In those iterations of the body of Christ, I could see like thinking through, oh, you know what? I said this to my brother in Christ over here, and I don't know that was a great, I probably need to restore that relationship in a way. And like, maybe I need to ponder on this a little bit. And like, how do I restore that? Do I need to go maybe to my buddy Drew and say, hey man, like, how should I restore this? What do you think the law is saying? Is that more of the way?
Yeah, 100%. And I like the way you put that, because you put it in the frame of, it takes imagination. It takes thought. Like you actually have to think, what would be the proper way to commit to justice in this relationship. And again, biblical justice is the same kind of, what you're describing is actually what I would describe as biblical justice. Not me. I think the biblical authors describe that as justice and righteousness, because you're thinking about, how do I right things? How do I foster relationships? How do I make sure that what I'm doing and my practices don't disregard those people who are vulnerable, or make people into vulnerable situations. It's got all of this relational thickness to it that simply isn't available in our law today.
Yeah.
And that's not a fault of our, I mean, it's just the way it is. Like, there's some ways in which I can say, yes, a lot of British and now American law was designed after large parts of the Old Testament, but it was designed by Brits back in the 1600s who were using Roman legal frameworks of breaking the law or keeping the law and interpreting the Old Testament that way. So it is true that our legal system today is both a descendant of a lot of Hebrew thinking and Christian thinking, and also a distortion of it at the same time. And again, that's not a judgment on our law. That's just the history of where it came from. So yeah, you got to do that work, and you got to imagine, and it's kind of simple. But you say, do unto others, right? And you can imagine all kinds of ways in which that just doesn't work if you don't have an imagination, right? If you say, like, okay, it's my wife's birthday. Well, what would I want for my birthday? Well, I'd want a 6-pack of really good beer, right? Expensive beer that I wouldn't normally buy on my own, right? But my wife doesn't drink beer. So like, I actually have to begin imagining something that at that level of the imagination has to be operative in a community in order for justice to happen. And I say that as, I was in a church in Newark, New Jersey, is a Brazilian church for about 13 years. And about 10 years of that, we worked in the housing project just down the street from the church in downtown Newark. And I watched agency after agency, many government agencies, but also some like private nonprofits, go into that housing project and without any imagination try and solve the problems of that community. And a common was, well, just like, we need to give the kids gifts, we need to give them the mom's gift card, give them monies, they just need to make more money or whatever, as if that would make anything better whatsoever, right? Like, there's no imagination whatsoever. Just is very flat. Well, they don't have money, let's give them money, and that will solve all their problems. And then, of course, people realize it didn't work, and then they never show up again. And we've been there for 10 years, so we're just kind of watching them kind of come and go. It takes a lot of what I call moral imagination to keep the law. In the same way that if you're tending a garden, like, you got to attend to it every day and see how things are responding to the sun and the water and nitrites and all that stuff. So in some ways, it's not rocket science, but it is very demanding.
Yeah. So you bring up, I was going to ask another question, but I'm afraid it'll dovetail us into a longer discussion. So I'm going to go to another
short answers. You notice.
It's okay. It's all good. I'm going to go to another quote. This is actually from page 153. Now you're going to have to educate me.
Okay.
What is nota bene?
Oh, that means just like a helpful note.
Side note. Okay.
Almost like, it's almost like you might want to know that. Yeah.
See, there you go. There you
go. Literally just means good note. Yeah.
Now, I will say, before I read the quote, here's what I tell people when we study scripture. The benefit of modern communication is that, like, when I don't understand what an author, like, I can ask you, hey, Drew, what did you mean by this?
Right.
A huge disadvantage with scripture that's like an ancient language that's no longer even used, and we can't even like talk to the author, and yet everyone apparently thinks they know what all of this is. That's me being a little bit sarcastic, but
no, it's a problem.
And it's a problem for me too.
Although, I think they're not a problem with you. I mean, and again, this is something we work on at the Center for Hebraic Thought. I do think there are things that will get us to better understanding of Scripture, and things that certainly make it worse. And one of the better things is understanding the structures of thinking.
Yeah.
Because, like, at the end of the day, and these are mostly literary, at the end of the day, when I tell you a story, and especially if the story is meant to have a purpose, like there's a moral to the story, I'm trying to teach you through storytelling, which scientists and everybody does this today. They use story to teach. I am putting a particular thing in conflict that has to come to resolution. Conflict, rising tension, resolution. Those are the structures of the story. So what I choose to put in conflict that gets resolved eventually does tell you something. It becomes kind of a laser pointer of all the things that might be true that you could say about whatever story I'm telling you. there are things that I am trying to point to by using the structures of the story that way. And so that's one example of many different literary structures you see across Scripture that I do think have some locked in pointers in them that where I can say, actually, that's not what that story's about, and here's how we know it's not about that, right? So it's the story of Babel is not a story about a tower, right? So
well, the
even
first time I was talking about the Tower of Babel, I remember someone using the term ziggurat, and I thought that they said cigarette.
Say it quick enough. Cigarette.
Yeah, ziggurat. No, they weren't all smoking. That's not what was going on.
And what happens is you get, and I had this, someone asked me to review this thing that Jordan Peterson did where he brought all these people together to talk about the book of Exodus and Genesis. And I actually had to turn him down after I watched it. I was like, I can't review this without flaming on these people, because they were all, even very notable Christian and Jewish thinkers were all just using the text as a mirror to say what they wanted to say. They just grabbed the part that they wanted and just disregarded the structural features.
It's become the modern, almost like the modern apologetic approach to like making Scripture say what it is that you need it to say in order to be right.
Right. And so this Hebraic thought thing that I keep harping about is really submitting to how the author constructs the story, what they put in parallel. Like, what are they trying to do by literary features? Because those are pretty universal. Like those are things where we can kind of say like, okay, what do you mean by this? Oh, I see by the way you've structured this. You must mean something like this, even if you don't get the exact thing. So, and again, I don't like talking about right and wrong interpretations. I like talking about better and worse ones because those are easier to figure out, right?
Yeah. So this is on, so the page number is wrong. It's on page 151. Now you're not wrong. I was wrong on that. So it's on page 151 and 152. And this is what you say. It's actually right at the bottom of 151 going into 152. So your success in understanding biblical law will depend on your knowledge of the Pentateuch as a whole and the amount of time you spend in the biblical text. No shortcut exists that can overcome this initial step. The less you understand about the way the Pentateuch speaks and thinks, as it were, the more abstruse these laws will seem. Now, I feel like we've already said that, but that's like, why is that the case? And what do you mean by spending time in the text in a way that honors the text for what it actually is?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. Man, you're picking all of my diatribes. Like syndrome. You've got me monologuing again.
That's good.
Well, I think in short, I mean something like you spend the same amount of time that my grandma spent in the text. And one of my best friends, Nielsen, who has an 8th grade education from Brazil, learned how to read Portuguese when he became a Christian as a crack addict. And started reading the Portuguese Bible. That's when he first learned how to read Portuguese. And he reads the Bible regularly, voraciously, and he wants to understand what they're saying, what they're thinking. And so he has I'll be honest with you, he knows the Bible better than I do. And when he comes to me with hard questions, I'm like, okay, I got to get ready because it is going to be a sophisticated. And again, this man is a stonemason. He's very intelligent. He's let his mind be formed by the biblical authors. And so he is really deep in, not in a conspiratorial way. And so his questions always require a lot of work to think through because he's thought through how these things are connected. Me and a colleague wrote an article for Christianity Today a few years ago. They asked us to write it on why many people need to give up daily devotional reading. It's kind of a strong belief of mine because my students were coming in telling me that they read the Bible every day of their life or 5 days a week, their whole life, up until they're 19, 20 years old. And then I would start reading the Bible with them in class and they would freak out because they had never heard of this before, or they didn't understand, when you show very basic things. And then sometimes they would say things like, Dr. Johnson has these crazy interpretations. And I say, well, what do you mean by that? What do you think is a crazy interpretation? And then they would tell me, and I go, that wasn't my interpretation. That was me reading the text out loud to you, right? And so I got very perplexed as to how you could be reading the text every day. Now, I became a Christian as a young adult. I never entered Christian culture in America very much, so I kind of have a distance from all of that. So I never got exposed to this. You should be reading your Bible every day and asking God to show you something. A very wonky exercise, which can be good for some people, but it is not going to lead you to understanding anything that we're talking about, because you really need to do. I tell my students who have not read the Bible that much, I'm like, look, you would do much better going home and reading the Gospel of Matthew 4 times on Saturday. You will understand Matthew better. You will have better questions about Matthew. You'll understand who Jesus is better. You'll have better questions when you get to Mark and Luke and John than you would ever get if you read a little bit of Matthew every day for your daily devotional reading and ask.
Yeah, well, you hit on, I think, the problem. I think most of America, at least Christians in America, I don't know about the rest of the world, tends to, when they think of reading, it's reading a snippet, a section. Right. It's not reading, at minimum chapters, but if you can read an entire book at one sit down, like that's ideal because you're going to get the entire flow of thought beginning to end. If you can't do it in one big sit down, try to do it like close together to get like everything that's working in the text before you get in there and kind of start dissecting stuff and working through stuff.
Yeah, and you can start small, like just do Philippians. I had to preach at a faculty service here, faculty and staff service, and all I did was read Philippians out loud. That's all I did. That was my sermon. I was like, look, I'm going to plagiarize Paul. I'm just going to read it out loud. I'm going to do a little bit of interpretation to modernize a few things here, but didn't touch much of it. There are people in tears. I broke down in tears at certain parts because the power of it. It's a sermon, and it's a beautiful sermon, and it's a I hate to use the word impactful, but that's it's a deep impact sermon that when you hear it flowing, and I'd practiced reading it so that I had the flow and I kind of understood how it worked. I was even shocked by it. Well, and then I ask people all the time, like, how many times have they done something like that? Yeah. And they'll go, I've never heard a whole book all at once or read a whole book all at once. And I think, well, that explains to me why you can't answer simple questions like you read something in Mark or Genesis and you can't answer, why did the author say that way? Like, why did they put it that way, right? So well,
and what you were hitting on as well, I think a lot of people have not experienced oral liturgy. Like they just haven't experienced the Bible being read orally. And I tell people, if you're going to read, don't just sit there and read it quietly. Read it out loud.
Yep.
Even if you got to go in your backyard and read it to the tree in the back. Like, read it out loud. Read it emotionally. Read it. It's designed to be read. Or read it to a group of people. I think it's so powerful to just hear the Word of God read in the full sequence.
And I work with Our Daily Bread, which is this. They produce lots of Bible devotional literature, which I think we're of the same heartbeat on all of this. I always tell people, look, the natural habitat of Scripture is your ear in community, not your eyes. Reading with your eyes is an artificial activity. Hearing with your ear is not artificial. Every human being can speak a language and listen and hear a language and understand it. Not every human being can read it on the page. These were written as sermons and speeches. Most of the scriptures are written to be heard, not to be read. It's a delight that we can study them through reading now. But if you're not actually hearing them in their natural habitat, which again is in community and out loud. So I say, I don't think reading on your phone even counts as reading myself. There's lots of research to indicate that as well. But I always say, if you have that the Bible app, like they call it the U version, the one that just says Holy Bible, it's done by the group in Oklahoma City. The best part of that app, because I know those people who run that app, the best part is the audible part where you can say, play, play this for me and listen. You will get more out of listening to it. I do it even.
Yeah, that's actually a comment on the channel. Like, what about audible audio Bibles? Yep. I think that's a great way.
I don't ever write anything academic until I've listened in long form to the text that I've been reading and working on, because I hear things, because they're designed for your ear. I hear things that I never noticed after reading it 20 times. So yeah, I think that's a huge, I always say gulp, don't sip when it comes to scripture. And then for people who don't know scripture that well, the thing, my grandmother did read one verse a day. She had a little thing. My stepmother has a little thing where she gets like, it's almost like a fortune cookie little thing. It's just one verse per day, but they know the context around the verse. They know, oh, okay, this is Romans. This is the last part of Romans. It's where Paul's making that argument.
Yeah.
I still don't understand, right? There's a framework within which that verse makes sense to them. And what I saw happening over the last 20 years in the classroom is the biblical literacy kind of dropped out, and the habit kept on going, and then the habit became deforming, so that when I made very basic statements about what Jesus said and did, people were horrified by that. And I said, what did you think it meant when when he says X, Y, or Z? And I realized they just had no framework to place all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
road to
Totally.
misunderstanding.
I love it. Well, let's do this. I want to get into some questions. We're about an hour in. We've got a pretty rigorous side conversation going, which is good. I love seeing the comments. I'm just going to work through some questions because I want the audience to be able to get some of their questions answered. And I'm going to try to start at the beginning, and we'll give them short, long, whatever. But here's the very first one from Tyler. He's a good buddy of mine. He's been on the show. How should we understand the types of instructions listed in Genesis 26:5?
I'm looking up Genesis 26:5.
And if we need to, I can put it on the screen if that's helpful.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the idea that Abraham listened and did everything as required. Okay. Hold on. Let me.
Yeah. So
Hebrew here.
Let me.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is actually an example of what I'm talking about. There's a little scholarly debate about why you have these triplicates and quadruplets of commandments, statutes, laws, and the other one has completely slipped my mind. Judgments.
Yeah.
Mishpatim. So why you have all four of those? There's a Jewish tradition that takes the four to be different types of commandments, different types of law. I don't think that works out as neatly as people would like it to. And here you have it with Abraham. This is a great question, because I actually had not thought about it in this context before. But Abraham listened to my voice. That's like a very loaded phrase, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, my laws. Well, we know God didn't ever give anything that looks like a commandment or a law to Abraham, right? What did God do with Abraham? He guides him everywhere he goes, right? Even the most controversial parts where he tells him to take his son, his only son, whom he loves, up to the place which I will show you. And so he doesn't even tell him, like, go to this mountain. He says, go in in this direction, and then I'll show you the place. And when he lifted his eyes and he saw the place, right? And you get the same thing with Isaac, I think Jacob as well. You get that repetition of story. It's God guiding people. And I mean, the word Torah that we've been using has often been translated as law, but I think we said this last time, the actual meaning of the word Torah is instruction, right? In fact, that last word there is...
that's right here in the text. Torah.
The English Standard says Torah. My laws, but actually, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but the New Living Translation, I think, gets it better. My instruction, right? The NIV does as well. And an instruction then can also mean you're approaching, but I won't say it's totally in the arena of wisdom literature at this point, right? And I think I talked about this last time. This picture in Proverbs 1, the picture we get of God, Yahweh, with his people is very similar to the one we get in Proverbs 1 of the father and mother over the shoulder of the son, who are saying, and literally, in Proverbs 1, it says, "Do not forsake your mother's Torah," or Torat, which is just the feminine of Torah. It's the only place where a human speaks Torah. It's is when it's not the dad, it's the mom. And then you go Proverbs 1-9, and we can guess maybe why it's the mom, not the dad. I think there's something going on in that whole section in the first 10th century where you get this elevation of women as wise and men as foolish and worthless.
Is that why we have what's Lady Wisdom that gets personified
Lady
as
Lady Wisdom, but you also get Lady Folly, and they're both women who are seeking the sexual attraction of young men. They're both trying to get the same thing. They're trying to get men. They're trying to bed young men. But one is a road to death, and the other one is a road to life. And you get to the end of that passage on Lady Wisdom, and the last 4 sentences, it's almost like a little poem. It's those who listen to me will have it. If he listens to me, if anybody listens to me, if they listen to me, listen. And it's been all throughout Proverbs 1-9. Incline your ear, my son. Listen to me. Incline your ear, over and over again. That the road to wisdom is actually through the ear, not through the eyes, right? Or the brain. You must listen with, the picture is they're over your shoulder, pointing out to you. I have 1 son and 3 daughters, but I totally understand. I was a son, or I am a son. The idea that it is good to be over your son's shoulders and say, hey, I know this lady over here looks really good, right? I've done this with used cars. I know that used BMW for $2,000 looks really good. And in the pictures, it looks like it's in good shape, but there's a story there that we don't want to find out that the rest of that story on that car. We want, somebody else to find out that story. And really this old Toyota Camry that's kind of beat up is probably your better bet here. It doesn't look like it, right? That's a lot, I think, of how it's the formal function of the law to be wisdom material, but that's how it works basically is, hey, if you are to be my kinds of people, to bring justice and make it multiply out in the world, you can't sell your children into sex slavery. Like you just can't do that, right? There are some no-go areas. But then there's some further development of, Jesus is not making up a new form of reasoning when he says, you shouldn't even think of a woman that way, then you've committed adultery. That's already going on, in Exodus. You should not hate your brother in your heart. That's from Exodus. I'm sorry, that's from Leviticus, right? You know the heart of a foreigner. You should love the foreigner because you know the heart of a foreigner. That's Exodus. Leviticus 19. You should love the neighbor as yourself and love the foreigner as yourself. So you get this, like your internal state really does have a lot to do with what's going on the outside and in the community. And I don't know what else to call that other than like wisdom formation training and behavior ethics. I mean, you can throw lots of modern words on it, but it's doing nothing like
I can tell you why. And this is again, context is king here. I'm going to tell you why I think this question came up, because Tyler was a former Seventh-day Adventist pastor who's left the Adventist faith, similar kind of journey as mine, and we kind of know the presuppositions that an Adventist, when they argue for certain positions, will utilize. And so here's kind of the framework. Okay. They already believe that the Decalogue is eternal. It always has been, always will be. That is their number one presupposition. They think it's a transcript of God's character. Okay. But the second big presupposition, without going to the actual text and determining if it's right, wrong, whatever, they claim that Sabbath from the Decalogue is rooted and inaugurated and instituted in creation.
Yeah.
Like that's when it started, and that because it's part of the eternally binding laws, it's for everyone, for all, and therefore, here's the logical fallacy, I think. Therefore, since it was there in at the creation account, well, very clearly it's just intended to be understood that Abraham had the Decalogue.
Oh, okay.
That's
a very like Jewish
Yes,
commentary move. Like,
yes,
yeah.
yes, 100%. Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with it, but they but in Jewish commentary, it's fine to say like, oh yeah, Abraham stepped through time and gave David a gift, so that David could understand the law from Abraham's time. Like they'll just say that,
Yeah.
and you're like,
Yeah.
what the heck? I don't.
At least they'll tell you what their presupposition is. At least they'll tell you that that's what's going on. But that's the reason, because oftentimes the argument will be made that Abraham also kept the Decalogue. That's not in the text. It's certainly not in the Hebraic thought. It wouldn't be, Abraham isn't even he's not a Hebrew.
Right. And even what the phrase kept the Decalogue would even mean in that. I mean, okay, so there's like, what do you do with him prostituting his wife out of fear for his life the second time? First time we'll give him a pass, right? Like, probably wouldn't be fun to be married to him at that point. But the second time he does it, okay, I'm trying to think the Decalogue. Did he violate anything? No, he didn't violate anything in the Decalogue. So you both have him having the Decalogue, but you have no critique of his behavior whatsoever. And the only reason I'm making a big deal out of that is because clearly the law goes back to critique Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Their bad behavior. There are laws that emerge that are clearly looking back into Genesis going like, no, that you should not have done that. Right?
That's a good point. It's a great point.
Or kind of like Paul in Athens, God has overlooked this time of ignorance, but there's coming a day, right? And he's going to judge you according to what he's now revealing through Israel. Yep. So obviously it's a wonky idea that he has the Decalogue with the text. It just doesn't even make sense of the text.
No.
But the idea, like the Jewish idea that the Noahide laws, that there's this basic sense of morality, that killing is wrong, that violence is wrong against other human beings, like that actually has some pull for me, that God is judging the earth according to something in the days of Noah.
Well, you said earlier in our conversation that humanity in general has a sense of morality. It's not like, all it takes is asking a few questions. Like, do you think this is right? Why do you think this is right? Like,
but not all of humanity.
Well, and I know you're right. Yes.
In some places in the military where I was like, it actually
that's
was part
fair.
of how I became a Christian, where I'm just like, oh, I did not know humans were capable of doing certain things.
That's fair. That's fair.
That might just be sub portions. So,
but I think so. But I think in the narrative of Genesis, we see that like the interaction with Cain and Abel, like clearly. Clearly, he knew he had done. Like, you don't need the Decalogue to know that taking someone's life is probably not something that humans should be doing, unless there's something mentally wrong with you, or you've been jaded in some way, or something.
I think we talked about this last time, but I would say the Decalogue, I kind of downplayed it a little last time. Like, it's when you read through, it doesn't really pop out as like it's significant, but it's not like fundamental. But it does lay like in principle some grounds for other laws. So I guess my problem would still be the same one I think I talked about last time, which is the Decalogue is all principles, but without the concrete instances, you don't know what the principles mean. I don't know if we talked about murder. I talked about
we talked about Sabbath a little bit in that, like, how do you even keep the Sabbath? And it's the Sabbath command is actually semi-approving slavery.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. Absolute God's law accommodates slavery and says if you're going to do it, this is how you're supposed to do it. I think there's a good case to be made that the law also sees kind of the abolition of slavery in a generation or two, if they were actually if Israel ever got their act together and practiced the justice of the law.
Well, I wonder if the whole slavery motif, again, I don't know if this is me just kind of thinking through it, because we see the idea of slave a motif to what sin is when we get into the New Testament with regards to you're a slave to something.
Right.
And then this whole like through Christ you've been freed, and the whole analogy that Paul uses with the man and the woman and the marriage, and
Right.
when the man dies, she's freed from the law that bound her before, like that whole like the
But
way
notice
that
there
interaction and
even
relationship.
slave is a neutral analogy. It's not that you're not trying to not be a slave. You're trying to be a slave to the right person, to Christ,
Yes.
rather than the other thing. So
Yes.
yeah, Moses is always a slave. The Hebrews are always slaves. Nobody is ever not called a slave in the Bible. If they're in their proper position, they're always a slave to somebody. But there are better and worse slave masters, and in the better category is always God and his care for his people.
Yeah.
So slave is just a neutral term there. Again, you can throw servant in there. Slave dredges up way too much of the American past of slavery, which is not at all.
The construct of worship is the posture of being a servant to something. Like if the attitude of worship, you worship something that you're enslaved to. I mean,
it can be. I think the bowing down language in Scripture, though, is never associated with. I don't think it's ever associated with worship. I think it's only associated with political issues of showing somebody is greater than the other.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's not tied directly to worship. But certainly when we say worship, we really mean bringing your money in some kind of form, grain or wine or oil or whatever, animals. You're bringing your money and giving it to something because you think it has power. And so you're certainly in a transactional relationship, which has all of the marks of addiction and these sick, bad cycles of interactions and codependency, etc. God needs you to feed it. And
that's interesting because you just caused me to realize that I put my presupposition on the text that you were saying.
Oh yeah, no, probably what I do for a living. Only because somebody wrote an article for us once where they talked about bowing down in Scripture as this great political act, and I was like, bowing as a political act. And then when she went through it, all the text, I was like, oh yeah, I'd always put bowing in kind of the worship category. So I'm the same as you. I'm just liberating another.
No, that's great. I love it. Thank you. I love that. And that's why I think it's great to have these conversations. I love it. Let me go to another question here, and we're just jumping around because these were kind of at different points in the discussion. So Adrian, Adrian lives reasonably close to where you went to school, where you got your PhD. He's from the UK.
Oh,
so
where in the UK?
He would have to put it in the chat because I don't know exactly where, but I think he got excited when he heard the first time that you were from the UK. So Drew's question is, or Adrian's question is, does Drew have a take on the law of Christ? I know there's only one time. It was two technically, if you call it the law of the Spirit of life.
Right.
And maybe some others that you could extrapolate the ideas from. But I think this is a big question with regards to probably Messianic Jews or people that I've seen a lot of work done, at least in that space, where it's like we're under a different set of laws and it's the laws of Christ and that argument. So I think that's where the question's coming from.
I don't think we talked about this last time, but maybe we did. First things first, when Paul or Jesus, when anybody in the New Testament says hanamos, the law, that does not mean the same thing in every context. Sometimes that is referring to the Torah, the teaching of Moses. Sometimes it's referring to, maybe just as often, referring to traditions built up around the teaching of Torah. Sometimes it's referring to misunderstandings only of the Torah. Sometimes it's referring to strictures laid on to people by groups based on what they think is demanded of them in the Torah. So you really have to kind of think, okay, what is Paul or Jesus? What are they addressing? What are they? I mean, to think for 1 second that Paul, a Pharisee from the tribe of Benjamin, which is like the worst flex on the face of the earth to be from the tribe of Benjamin when you go back into the Old Testament, but he's a Pharisee and he understands the Torah. To think that he, for any second, would think that the Torah is like this oppressively binding system that cannot be in any way practiced by Gentiles is a little bit, it's impossible for me to imagine Paul thinking that. For him to thinking cultural context of the Torah is practiced in a binding way that could seem to be oppressive. Yes, I can absolutely see that. Wouldn't be hard to imagine that at all, just from the little bit we know about the Pharisees. So when we get to the law of Christ, if you just extend the metaphor of Torah, just again take it as these are Jews writing from a Greek translation of the Old Testament. Some of them knew some of the Hebrew, so they would understand the conceptuality here better than us. That Torah, the law of Christ, is the instruction of Christ. So when you talk about when Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," I know it's a cliche phrase, but it actually unpacks a lot of his thinking about the instruction of God through Moses and his instruction that now brings to fullness the instruction of Moses. And that it's a way, again, this is very Hebrew, right? That his instruction is a way of being in the world. It's literally a via, and it leads to life. It's great also because what he says is it sounds like a bumper sticker for Christian, like a Christian radio station or something, but the way, the truth, and the life is now a testable formulation. I mean, he's saying like my instruction, if inhabited, will lead to life, whatever that looks like. And so if you in community embody Jesus's instruction by the power of the Holy Spirit, and it's not leading to life, then you can say, this is bunk, right? This is some weird hoax or some guru passing through that was selling this stuff, right? So I think when you talk about the law of Christ, that particular instance, you're really, for me, you're just talking about the instruction of Christ, which is bringing the Torah to full volume. And I will also point out, bringing the Torah to full volume outside of a Jewish bounded set. So where Jews are the determiners of what the Torah looks like in all of its expressions.
No, that makes sense. So I think if I heard you right, and you can correct me where I err on what your statement is. If we're thinking Hebraically, this is not a list of like do's and don'ts. It's a way of living in community to be the people of God. Started out, in the context of the Israelite community, and you really could only kind of honor that inside the covenant. But as things adjusted, as covenants changed, as all of that kind of shifted, it's not that they went away, it's not that they changed or entirely, but the way you work that out as a community obviously functioned a little bit differently inside the construct of the covenant. But then when we get to the New Testament and Torah comes, into really, even when John is saying like the flesh became, word, like the word became flesh. Right. Like now we have, I don't even know if I can say this, but we have the literal embodiment of the law.
Yeah, the Torah, the wisdom of God.
Walking around. I mean, like, like everything that you were supposed to do in community, you have, and that's why I think what I'm hearing you say, like Jesus is turning the volume up on you say this, I say this. And it isn't this set of regulations. It's if you want to walk in community and be a part of my kingdom, then you need to live like my people, and you need to treat people in certain ways. And what is what is the ultimate thing? It's love. That's what the ultimate, fulfillment of the law is, love. And I think that's ultimately played out in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Like he ultimately does that.
I mean, a litmus test of this covenant and law idea is, and someone can fact check me, right? Because I'm not a New Testament scholar, but I've read it a couple times. I don't think any of the Jewish the people who Jesus has conflict with in the Jewish leaderships, the various forms of leadership that he has conflict with, the people and the leaders are all amazed at his understanding of the Torah. So nobody says he's teaching a new law, or there is a worry that he's rejecting the law. There is a worry that he's doing things from some other spirit or whatever. But everybody agrees that it's his understanding of the Torah that is so remarkable, alongside the signs and wonders and the other things about Jesus that are compelling. So even there, it's not the accusation it's made. Kind of like with signs and wonders, nobody ever claims in the New Testament that didn't happen, right? They don't ever say like, oh, everybody is like, okay, that happened. Now we got to figure out by whose power did that happen, or under what context did that happen, inside of our keeping of the law or outside of our keeping of the law. And again, so Sabbath features prominently. Jesus doesn't ever reject Sabbath. He doubles down on Sabbath and says, yes, of course, Sabbath. But Sabbath, even you all admit, if your lamb goes astray and falls down a well, you can break Sabbath, to go over and help your lamb because it's worth that, right? He's referring to very famous Jewish discussions that will later end up in the Talmud, that like, look, you guys admit this. That's all I'm saying, and that's almost his reasoning. He's like, that's all I'm saying is you guys said that I can't break wheat off of a stalk because you guys claim that that's working.
Yep.
Torah doesn't say that that's working. But all I'm saying is, it's okay. It's okay to eat when on the Sabbath. There are priorities here that need to be heeded. And absolutely sitting in a chair all day Sabbath is not the priority.
So do you think, because I know where, I've got probably some Adventist friends that are watching right now that are probably tickled pink that you just mentioned what you did, because their extension of that is, yeah, Drew, you're right. We should be keeping the Sabbath right now. And other people aren't keeping the Sabbath and they're breaking the law and therefore they're sinning.
Right.
But we've been talking about the extension of, like, how do you actually do this? Like, if we want to keep the law, even if we just say, I want to, like, my Lord and Savior is Jesus Christ. I want to do his commands. Like, I do not want to be a disobedient, rebellious child of the King. Like, the one that died, was raised, like, he's got the keys to Hades. Like, I don't want to be rebellious to him, right? So, like, I get that pressure, but at the same time, it's not the do this, don't do this. So then the question is, okay, let's talk about Sabbath.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
I mean, the interesting thing is Sabbath is a ritual, right? I'm like, by all definitions of ritual, Sabbath is a ritual. Because it takes an ordinary practice and it changes it strategically for a new purpose, right? Like, which is all rituals do something like that. But it is remarkable to me, again, there are zero instructions for how to keep the Sabbath. It is, we talked about the imagination required. It really does, like the very thought process you just went through is Sabbath thinking. Like, you're looking around. And I mean, I think this is probably what's being hinted at. My opinion is probably being hinted at in the Psalm 1 is, what is that guy muttering over day and night in the Torah? Well, he's probably thinking like, hey, how does this apply to how I'm harvesting my barley? How does this apply to all these non-Hebrews that live with me? By the way, the Gentile issue is always there from the beginning. I mean, Abraham has non-Abrahamic people with him. The Hebrews always have non-Hebrews with them. At the center of society, the Jews also have Gentiles with them. And you have to think, okay, I mean, one of my favorite parts of the Torah is when the daughters of Zelophehad come to Moses and say, well, all of our men are dead, implying they went and fought, they fought on behalf of Israel, right? And now they're dead. And there's no provision in that Torah you just read off to us for us women. And so Moses goes back to Yahweh and says, what do we do? And Yahweh comes back and says, yep, women are included. All right, awesome. Foreigners, can they keep Passover? I don't know. Let me go to Yahweh. Let me ask and see if we can. And so there's, even in the giving of the Torah, the actual historical event as it's kind of unfolding over years, there's modification going on based on case law, on things that are coming before them. So I can't imagine a world in which somebody says, here's what you do and don't do on Sabbath, and that's it. Like just I mean, in Jewish thought, you do have a couple of rules. Like, you can't create anything on Sabbath. That was part of the, because they saw Sabbath as part of creation, so you can't create it. So you can't write an email. You can't flip on a light switch, because they decided that was more like making a fire than flipping a switch. And again, it's just kind of a rule of thumb. But even saying you can't create something on Sabbath is a principle that then you have to like hammer out in concrete instances. And here's why I'm landing this. If God cared that desperately about the details of how we practice Sabbath, he would have just told us how to do it, right? But he leaves it up to him. This is what I wrote in another book on ritual, which is, I think I call it safe improvisation. All the rituals of Israel required improvisation, including every single sacrifice. There's not nearly enough instructions in any of the sacrifices for you to perform correctly. They all require improvisation, and 2 of them are almost entirely improvised: marriage and Sabbath. There's no instructions for how to get married. There's no instructions for how to practice Sabbath. There are insinuations in various places about things that would be appropriate or inappropriate for Sabbath. Like your animals have to rest on Sabbath. Your servants have to rest on Sabbath. It extends all the way out to everything in your homestead. Anything that can stand has to sit, basically. And then how much of the day? Sun up to sundown, sundown to sundown, doesn't say. I will point out that when Jesus comes, that this is the token thing to do. Jesus comes on the scene talking to Pharisees who are mostly in his camp, theologically speaking. They're the people who agree with Jesus the most about his theology. And they also have developed issues of tithing, is one he points out, right? They have had this question: how much do we go? Okay, we tithe from our crops, we tithe from our oil. Should we tithe from these little jars of spices that we have? And they
the mint and the
mint, dill, and cumin, right, as they traditionally say. And at some point, somebody said, well, let's just play it safe improvisation. Let's just play it safe. Yeah, let's just do that, right? Jesus comes along and he points out this exact decision that they've made about Sabbath, and he says, good on you for doing that. But priorities, you can't do that and then neglect all of these other priorities in the Torah, which is looking out for the vulnerable mainly, is what he seems to be interested in there. That's the law of Christ, as far as I can understand. Like that's it. This is why I mean, we call it Hebraic thought, which is a really nerdy way of saying, how are we supposed to think properly and live properly as a community out all of these things that God demands of us for the sake of all the families of the earth, right? So I'll point out, this goes back to Abraham. The law does go back into Abraham in the sense of Genesis 12. Everything that God gives to Abraham, everything he does for Abraham is for the sake of all the families of the earth. And then later it's changed for the sake of all the nations of the earth. Which again, what does the New Testament do? Jesus comes and turns up the volume on that one. Every tribe, every tongue, every nation, right? But that's with Israel is it's not for them. It's if they're not even doing the things that God, if they're not even bringing justice in the world, what hope is there for the rest of the nations around them?
Yeah. So I'm tracking everything that you're saying. What do you think the reason is that Paul then seems to say? I call it the freedom of the law. Like there are certain things that are, I would say, much more ethnically kind of like, you want to be Jewish,
right?
Don't become Judaic and like then stamp all these things as a requirement. But listen, you want to do the festivals, you want to do the, like, that's fine. That's part of your your ethnicity and your lineage, and like, great. But it seems like Paul seems to go, but be really careful to now like lord that onto,
right?
Like, you're not doing it this way. I know how to keep Sabbath. You're not keeping Sabbath this way. Because he talks about don't judge people for feasts and festivals and days of the week, right, and all that stuff. Yeah. So I'm tracking, but is that also Hebraic thought?
Yeah, no, I exactly. I mean, I think Paul, next to Jesus, Peter, Paul, and James and John are like your best expositors of Hebraic thought in now under the law of Christ, right? Um, what's interesting to me is in Acts 15, the church makes a very clear decision on this.
Yep.
The all Jewish leadership, which included Pharisees, who were only known to us as the Pharisees who were in the group of leadership,
Yeah.
right? So
Council of Jerusalem.
yeah, the Council of Jerusalem, they make a decision, and they do actually describe the Torah as laying an unnecessary burden upon the Gentiles, right? So they do see it as something that only belongs to the Jew. Like, we can't ask non-Jews to do this thing. We can ask them to keep the principles of the Torah, like how you treat animals, how you treat your body, how you treat others. Those kinds of things that were again were a current they're a pressing problem in most cultures, but for them, sexual immorality was a huge issue of how you distinguish yourself from the Roman culture around them. But they very clearly don't think that you can lay that burden upon Gentiles. And then, I always have to point out to my Catholic friends, the last note we get on Peter is Paul yelling at him in Galatians and saying, like, hey, this dude is like, he's doing insider outsider stuff. He's hanging out with his Jewish friends and kind of looking down on people who aren't doing that stuff. And I think Paul's worry is this looks a little bit, I don't think he thinks it is, but he thinks it looks a little bit like Judaizing, what we would call now, right? So you do have this kind of like, yeah, it's fine. If you're Jewish, it's fine to do this. Almost this kind of like, and if you want to, yeah, go ahead. If you're not Jewish, you're Gentile, you become a Jewish Christian, right? Fine, go ahead. But we can't lay that particular set of practices down on other people.
Yeah. Hey, before I forget, Adrian said that he is near Ascot.
Oh,
Winslow.
Windsor. Yeah. Okay.
Windsor.
Yeah, I know exactly where that is. I drive by it on the way to going up to Oxford.
So next time you're there, maybe I should connect you guys. It'd be good for you guys to chat.
Yes.
That'd be great. So a couple of other questions. I know we're getting close to the. How much more time do we have for you?
We have about 10, 15 more minutes. I mean,
okay,
I'm not super limited. I just got to walk home. I'm not scared of the dark.
Is that because people are keeping the law?
Yes, here in Holland, that is true.
So a couple of other questions. I don't know that we can get through all of these. So let me do this. Here's a question by M. Brown. Please answer this. Why didn't the disciples ever mention to the new believers that they had entered into the new covenant? On Pentecost, the 3,000 came and left, not hear that the new covenant had come. So I think the big question, because I've heard M. Brown ask this. I think it's a common modern Christian thing to say is that we're under a new covenant. We're not under the old covenant. It's that language. And then they tend to connect that with the new covenant is entirely different laws. It's this, what I would probably in our conversation say, that's not very Hebraic. That's not really the way you would think of.
A lot of dispensational theology kind of floating around.
And oftentimes I think what M. Brown had, what I've seen him say before is there really isn't ever, at least what he's saying, like a new covenant. Right. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
I mean, I think the term, I think in Jeremiah 31, Chodesh is the term there, which again, as modern American or modern people, right? When I say new, like I got a new car, you have a very specific concept of what I mean when I say I got a. So I always, if I ever get a new car, I always have to say, well, new to me, right? Because I haven't had the fortune of buying a brand new car yet. But notice we have the phrase brand new, right? To ambiguate which one we're talking about. or when I buy laptops, I usually buy refurbished ones, right? So a renewed one. We have these various senses. So I think that sometimes we're dragging a specific concept of newness to the covenant. So if we say a renewed full covenant or something like that, then you see, okay, well, this whole Jesus turning up the volume on the Torah and the Mosaic covenant makes perfect sense. He's renewing in this new context, like all the prophets do. They renew, but there is this new covenant. I have another issue with. I went to Covenant Theological Seminary. I had to take several classes on covenant theology that were very good classes, excellent classes. So I understand the issue with covenants. I don't use the word covenant because it fools Christians into thinking that it's a biblical term, and it's not a biblical term. It's a, it's a term that's used in the Bible, but covenant is just a generic term that means treaty, that we've translated in English into covenant for various reasons of Old English. And then we think that it's like some special thing. Now, the covenants God makes with Israel are special in the fact that they both follow standard covenant formulas, treaty formulas, and they also radically change them in very interesting ways. But that to say, one reason why I would guess, and this is speculation for M. Brown, that the New Testament is not talking about the new covenant that much is because they weren't as obsessed with the idea of covenant as we are. Like covenant was not the organizing system for them, even though it was an important part of their history and it was a way of thinking about their relationship to God. I mean, it is radical to think that God in the ancient Near East would make a treaty with a group of people, binding himself to that group of people with his own rights and obligations that he had in that treaty. And even when the people failed, he would still keep the treaty with them. Like it's both playing into that treaty formula and then kind of crinkling it and reshaping it in ways that would have been unheard of.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure. Like when you look at the rhetoric of the prophets, maybe I could just say this. Neither are the prophets talking about, oh, you broke the covenant with God. You broke the covenant. Look at you. God made all these things, this covenant with you, and look at how you've behaved, right? They don't talk that way either. And so in that way, I would just say Jesus is acting exactly like a prophet. He talks like a prophet. He walks and heals like a prophet. Like almost everything he does looks exactly like what Elijah and Elisha did. God talks about him as if he's a prophet. He's described as a prophet, but he also happens to be the Messiah as well. So it's not surprising that his disciples are not hopped up on treaty language either. Or maybe they just thought it was so plainly obvious it wasn't worth saying. I don't know. I mean, we're all speculating here. But there is one bit of rhetoric that you get, and I don't mean rhetoric in a bad way. I just mean a way of talking and expectations in one's talking that is throughout the Gospels in Jesus's language to his disciples, and certainly with his disciples' language in their epistles, and even in Acts 2, in Acts 7, with Stephen's speech. All of them, Jesus and his disciples. Jesus expected his disciples that if you were a member of this treaty from God, you should see all this coming a mile away. Now, it's a weird belief because none of us would have seen it coming a mile away. But Peter and then later Stephen all say like, yeah, this all is in perfect continuity with everything we've seen at this point. This Jesus did signs and wonders like Moses did signs and wonders before our ancestors, right? Like they just see it as like one continuous flow of history that makes perfect sense if you understand how God has treated with people. They just don't label it as this new treaty.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that response.
Jeremiah ever meant it to be a catchphrase, like the new covenant, right?
You're telling me he didn't expect us to do systematic theology and then wrap it all up.
Covenant theology is it is kind of a form of systematics where you have a category in which you kind of put everything, and sometimes certain things don't fit. I mean, I do think you get covenant language certainly in Paul, right? And 1 Corinthians,
but covenant language is more, at least I've understood it as more of it's a relationship. There's two parties, and there are certain
It's a very formal
There,
relationship.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, whether or not this is, I don't know if this is Hebraic or not, but it seems like covenants had to have laws to deal with
Yeah.
the way the relationship is going to work if it's such a formal relationship, So in that regard, I do understand why people think of the old covenant in one way, and then they, I think, maybe overcorrect and think of the new covenant as, you can see how people say the new covenant, different laws, different, like you can see how they get into
Right.
that. And I've done that. I've fallen into that kind of vein of thinking, trying to wrestle through but I do think that it's interesting trying to stay in the mind of the Hebrew, saying like, hey, it's not that this is entirely different, but we do have this Gentile group that's now part of this relationship with God.
And Gentiles have always been part of the relationship, right? So that part isn't even new.
But they don't have to do the same. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. If they were Gentile, so like they were going to have to do this very specific. They had to get circumcised. They had to
with a flint knife too. Not even though they had metal knives all the way back in the days.
As a sarcastic thought, Drew, I always kind of like to ponder, how did they check if someone was circumcised or not? Did they have to carry around their foreskin or what?
No, I mean, this is daily life in ancient world, modern world. Like, you see people naked all the time. Like, that, you don't go to the shower. So
the laws of public indecency in today's wouldn't apply back then.
Well, it's actually hard to know, although absolute nakedness. I mean, okay, there are later formalizations that up to a certain age, a woman, a girl, or a boy can be seen naked, right? But it's not formalized in any kind of way, so it probably varied culturally over time. But yeah, I think that, though, is a good point in the law, which I don't think I made in the book, but so much of the instruction of God through Moses happens inside the homestead, the household, where nobody would know except for the people in the house. Like, a lot of the things that you can do and violate God's law and make your sacrifices to him not work, a foul stench before God, could be things that only your wife or your husband or your children knew about. And I mean, I always say, like leprosy is not a disease. Poison ivy would count as leprosy for most of us, right? If it breaks open the skin, that would be a form of leprosy according to Leviticus. How tempted would you and I be is if we got some kind of rash that broke open our skin to just pull our sleeves down or cover it up and never say anything, because we know, not this whole I know there's this whole thing about having to call out unclean, and leprosy was this horrible thing. People moved in and out of leprous conditions all the time, right? It's actually moving out of impurity and into purity was just a normal daily affair for almost every Hebrew. But you have to declare it, and then you'd have to go give an animal sacrifice. You have to shave all the hair off your body. You have to sleep in a different room from everybody else in your family. You have to go baptize yourself in front of the priest, etc. I can understand the motivation to just pull the sleeve down and act like that wound didn't just burst open, right? And I think circumcision probably would not function, because I imagine there, with something that extreme, there would be some kind of check. Maybe the priest would have the right to come in and be like, is everybody circumcised in your house? Look, when Moses didn't do it, God tried to kill him.
Yeah.
So it was taken that seriously. So you can imagine a priest saying, hey, we're just trying to save your life here. God might strike you down if you were unfaithful on this thing. So.
Yeah, so good. I know that we're practically out of time. I'm going to give you one last question, and then we're gonna bow out. And this is a pretty standard Adventist question, just so that you know where it's coming from. What's the significance of God writing the Ten Commandments on tablets with his own finger? And that comes with a presupposition that there is a significance to that. But Yeah.
Well,
What do you
it
think?
is mentioned, and you do have to say it's the only part of Scripture that is actually written directly by God and not through a prophet. So it does seem significant in the text. Again, the 10 things, which are not commandments, but the 10 things are, and I talk a lot about this in the book, the principles and instances are principles that do seem nodal. Some of them seem like you can't dishonor your parents and expect to have any kind of a good society, right? I have an Israeli friend who's a philosopher who just has like you can't disrespect your traditions and your parents and think that your community is not going to absolutely suck, right? That's just not the way it goes. So, but I will also say the 10 commandments, if I can be so heretical, I would say they're impotent and flappy. If that's all you had, you actually would have no idea what to do with the 10 commandments, because you'd say, okay, honor your parents. What does that even mean, right? And even Jesus, right? Like people who looked righteous in the leadership's eyes in the days of Jesus by giving their entire inheritance as korban, as a sacrifice to the temple complex, to deepen their pockets in gold. Jesus is like, how is that honoring your parents? Like he has to explain to him how that concrete practice is actually deviating widely from the principle which you should have been able to pick up from the Torah itself. And obviously, large chunks of the legal instruction have to carve out what's the difference between murdering and manslaughter, right? So even saying do not murder doesn't make any sense. Even I think I talked about this in the book, God had just murdered a bunch of Egyptians before he wrote that with his own finger. Moses had murdered an Egyptian with his own hands that carried down those tablets. And then when he got to the base of the mountain, he set out murdering 3,000 of his countrymen who were having a giant orgy to this golden calf and Yahweh, right? So what does do not murder mean? Even in the historical context, what does it mean? You absolutely need all of this other instruction to help you understand what those principles meant. So it doesn't make any sense to me that somebody would think like Decalogue can carry all this weight and do all of this work for you.
Yeah. So I will, I'll add to just what you're saying. A couple of things to think through. First of all, the question I think comes with a presupposition that God has fingers.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, that's a whole other conversation we can have.
So that's one thing, okay, which is gonna rabbit trail in. We could spend hours talking about that.
Yeah.
But I always like to actually point out, I don't actually think it meant with his literal finger. I actually think it was a Hebrew idiom for the authority of God, the power of God. That's my personal feeling. This is in the New Testament. But it is by the finger of God that I cast out the demon. This is Jesus talking.
Yeah.
So we know he's not carrying around,
Yeah.
he's not carrying around like the literal finger of God that he's like, using as a wand, So
although there was a literal seed of Moses that they actually found in a village just north of Galilee, Sea of Galilee.
Really?
Which everybody thought was a figurative thing. And then lo and behold, they find something actually labeled seed of Moses. And it's a seat. It's a chair made of basalt.
I did not know that. Interesting.
But yeah, I think he knew it. I think he's pulling very clearly on the 10 Commandments.
I think he's making a claim for deity too. I mean, he's doing this like I and the Father am one. Like it's all deity, authority, language. So I think that's more what's going on with the 10 Commandments is that this comes from the authority of God.
Sorry, I think I have a delay here. A mighty hand and an outstretched arm. That's all not just Pharaoh language about Pharaoh. That's specifically the Ramesside Pharaoh. So the Ramesses 1, 2, and 3 are using that language. I'm reviewing a book right now, actually, that I'm going to probably interview the podcast on attributes of gods in the ancient Near East. And this is a big topic. Like, do gods have feet, hands, fingers, bellies, organs? Because mainly in ancient Near East, they do. mainly so they can have sex with things or each other, right? That's a lot of what's going on in the ancient Near East.
Oh, don't get me started. You and I are going to have the conversation about Genesis 6 now that you brought it up.
Oh, that's a short conversation because I only have one thing to say. I just made this critique of a colleague who sent me something he said on it, that it is unclear to me, just reading the Hebrew, it's completely unclear to me why this is not just talking about humans, and then the Nephilim are not the sons of the gods. It could be equally rendered the sons of the rulers and the daughters of men. I'm not convinced of that one either, but that and the Nephilim all read as humans to me. I don't.
Well,
I don't understand
I've been dramatically affected by Heiser, so there's
I think
my big problem.
Heiser was smoking that University of Wisconsin-Madison dope. Him, and I love Tim Mackey. I'm friends with Tim Mackey. I love what they do with the Bible story, but everybody who comes out of University of Wisconsin-Madison comes out with this divine world council view that I am not convinced of at all.
Well, I'm telling you right now, you definitely bought some winning followers from a few people that are in my line of that fight with me on this view.
It's a perfectly acceptable view. Here's my problem, and it's how you translate scripture. I don't think you actually need to understand a single thing about ancient Near Eastern history in order to properly understand scripture. I think all historical context, cultural context, it's all great. Obviously, I've studied a lot of it in my work. It illuminates things. It helps to make sense of a few perplexities, but it doesn't determine the meaning of anything in scripture. And that view is entirely determined by ancient Near Eastern studies from the last 150 years. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It just puts it in that category for me. And then quite honestly, I didn't know anything about that view. And as I read the Bible, I had never for once thought that I needed to explain what Nephilim were until I started teaching undergrads. And they're like, those are aliens, right? And I'm like, what? Why would you think they're aliens? Oh, those are demigods that came from. I'm like, why would you think that? And then I had to go like on the interwebs and find out all of these horrible views out there. Not that Mike Heiser's view is horrible, but there are lots of uninformed views. Mike it would have been
interesting to have.
He knew exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to have you have a conversation with Mike and see how he would interact with you.
Irony of ironies, I did a whole video course for his ministry that just launched a few months ago, and I'm doing a few more videos. They've asked me to do several video courses. So
on the awakening theology? Oh, I don't know if I lost you. Did I lose you?
Oops, I lost you.
Sorry about that. Were you saying awakening theology? Yeah. That's where you? Yeah.
Yep.
Very good.
Yeah. So I'm not adversarial with these people at all.
Yeah.
And again, I want to reemphasize, Mike Heiser, University of Wisconsin-Madison is a top tier program. The people who come out of that program are very sharp. But that doesn't mean I have to agree with them on everything.
We're going to end with this final comment. I love this right here. Never go full Rob Skiba.
I don't know what that means.
You have to go look it up then later. You'll have to look it up.
Okay.
That guy's gone straight crazy with the alien ideas.
Oh, okay. So, I thought you meant I was going Rob Skiba.
No, not at all. Not at all.
No, I appreciate it, and I certainly am completely open to having my mind changed on it. I just, every time I read the stuff that people think's changed, my colleagues, like scholars who they seem to get into it, and they tell me the reasons why, and I'm just like, it's just not doing it for me. I'm slow to move.
It's all good, man. It's all good. At least I know I have something to pray for you on. That's all. So I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Listen, Dru, thank you. You've already given us extra time. I appreciate you tons. Would absolutely love to have you come back. We should do some more collaboration together. Thank you so much for your time. Tell your family I said hi. I know they don't know me, but tell them thank you a ton, and appreciate all your work, and have a safe walk back to your house.
I very much appreciate it. I do a lot of podcasting. This has been exceptionally enjoyable.
I love it.
over the standards, I should say. So
I love it. Well, let's do a couple more
Right.
together. I
Mike.
appreciate you, man.
yeah,
All right,
absolutely. And
friends.
thanks everybody who tuned in and lobbed good questions at me.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Continue to put the comments in. I would love to see what you've got. Continue to see how the show, how did it hit you? What did you learn? Do me a favor. Go check out Dru's website. Go check out his book. Go buy his book. He's got more than just the one. Just go spend some time in his work. Appreciate you tons. Keep an eye out for the next few days. We're going to be doing some additional lives coming up. Next week, get yourself together, because next week we have another special guest coming on that you will not want to miss. So guys, be safe, be blessed. I hope this conversation was refreshing. I hope that you got to see two guys wrestle with some ideas. And guess what? We don't always agree on stuff, and that's great. It's wonderful. Love you guys tons. Be safe. And we'll see you on the next one. God bless, okay?